Hi, good morning, everyone. I'll be conducting the Techtalk today on best practices with React Native StyleSheet. In today's Techtalk, I want to achieve a few set goals. I will be starting off with a brief introduction into what React Native style sheets are, and also about the best practices which we can follow from a UI perspective to give a good understanding on what are the best practices and why do we follow these best practices in order to optimize our code. And I'll also be going on with a brief demo on how we can implement these best practices. React Native is a JavaScript-based mobile app framework which can also be used to create web applications, but the main purpose of using React Native is for mobile applications, which is for cross-platform users between Android and iOS. And in React Native, we natively render the components to be able to use them in both Android and iOS. For example, instead of using div tags and normal HTML tags, React Native has their own native tags which we will be using. And React Native style sheet is an abstraction of the CSS style sheets which we use in general, where instead of using all styles, we create our own general style sheets. This is an example of the difference between React or HTML and React Native to give a good understanding of why we say we use natively rendered tags. On the left, you can see a React code, which uses div tags, h1 tags, and so on. But when it comes to the right side, you can see a React Native code where you have, instead of a div tag, you have a view tag. Instead of h1 or p tag, you have a text tag. So these are natively rendered components, and that's the difference in React Native. And moving on to what are the best practices and why we follow them. There are various best practices which we can follow, and I'll be going through a few common best practices which we can use. The first is making sure that your style sheets are accessible. This depends mainly on the file structure of your project, where the files are and what each file contains. For example, if you're going to use common style sheets, you have to create the assets folder. Having written the assets folder is where the asset folder acts as a root folder for all your common styles. And if you have any common components, like you have a card tag or you have a particular section that is being repetitively being used, so you consider it as a common component, you can create that inside a components folder. As you can see, I have attached a few screenshots for your references. We have the assets folder, which has the fonts, images, and the CSS, which will be used throughout the application. So that's how you can structure your common style sheets. And when you are giving your part, it makes it quite easier. And also when it comes to common components, like you had the card view, had the header, footer, these are common components, and you can have it under a common folder. So the reason why we need to make sure the files are easily accessible is you have a top level structuring in your application, and it's a great practice because you minimize the use of having dot dot slash in your file path. So the files are close to each other and it's easily accessible. And it also allows us for refactoring and easy modifications, because when we have them all sorted out in files like as the screenshots is attached, it's easy to modify the styles because you had only do the changes in that particular file. And the next best practice is using common components. For example, you can see that these all are similar card components with just a background color change and the icon changes. So similarly, when we are working on a project, we might have components that has unique styles, unique components. So it's easier if we can create these components separately, and we can create them separately and create common classes with short descriptive names or common naming conventions. So when we are creating these components, easy for us to read the code. As like for example, I have given an example over here where we have created common buttons. We have a yellow button, black and blue button. And once we have created these common components within our assets folder, it'll be quite easier to call within the index files, the main HTML or main JavaScript files, just by calling the button. And then if you want to change something within the black button uniformly, for example, if you want to change the height of it, we can only just change it within the common class, and it will render it throughout the application. So that's the benefit of creating the common components, where we can reduce the use of duplicate or redundant classes, and it's easy to read. Your code is more easy to read, it's more clean, and you can now easily make changes that can be rendered uniformly throughout your application. Another best practice is bundling up the common style sheets. We previously learned how we can structure our style sheets within the assets folder, but if you bundle them up into one place, it's easier to call for all these styles that is in different files. For example, in a normal index.js file, we have called all the separate common style sheets that we have created. And in our JS files, we can then from one place call all the files. And that's what we call by bundling the common style sheets. And the main purpose is to make sure that it's easy to read, it's more expressive, your code is more expressive, it's more concise, and we don't have to deal with too many file paths or import too many files. You can just import a singular file path and call all your common style sheets and components. That's the main benefit of using this common best practice. And the other one is about keeping style sheets close. We learned about having style sheets under the assets folder, but there might be instances where you have so many screens within your mobile application and you want to create all these screens separately. So when you're creating them separately, you might have specific unique styles for certain screens, and those style sheets can be created close to each other. As mentioned in this example, inside a screen, you have the JavaScript file, and you can also call the styles.js file as well. So it's close to each other. It's once again reducing the file path, and we can having it in the same directory reduces overheads when you are implementing. For example, you can easily override and make sure that you don't affect other screens when creating any changes in this particular screen. That's the main objective of having style sheets per screen as well. And once again, as code is more expressive, it's easy to modify. For example, you want to do a change only in one particular screen, then with the use of these style sheets, we can make it easily make it modified, and that's the main benefit of having this practice. And I'll be running through a short demo on how we can actually implement this on the code. We have created an assets folder, and within this assets folder, we have the images and CSS. The reason why we have images is certain applications, we have too many images and icons going on. Bundling them up together is easy for us to handle image files. And also within the image files, sometimes we might have images that is specific to a certain screen. So we can bundle those images once again within another folder, like how I have done over here. We have a background image and a section image, which is only relevant to the home page. So I have created a home page folder, and within that homepage folder, we have the images that is relevant for that particular page. It makes us easy to handle the image files. And these images are outside the homepage within images, as you can see, because these are common images that can be used in more than one screen. Next, we have the image.js file. Why we use this is instead of always giving out the source path, we create variables by saying in this function. For example, as you can see in the landing page, I have called the pages relevant to the home page, and within the common area, I have called down the images that's relevant only for general purposes. And another best practice we can follow is to order these in alphabetical order. As I have mentioned down over here, it's all in alphabetical order. And also you have to focus on your naming conventions. I have used camel casing for all my naming conventions. It's best to always follow it's best to follow one naming convention instead of having too many. So it's easy for us to remember, and when it comes to naming, it's easy for us to also come up with proper naming conventions. That's the best practice with the images folder. And then we have the SCSS or CSS folders. As you can see, we have created various common folders within. We have the common.styles.js file, and within this there are various other constants I have created. We have created a common constant, and within that we have the body tag. This would render the style for all the pages, and I have created a few common components that can be repetitively used throughout the application. As you can see, there's a small difference in the styles I have used. Instead of saying font family or font name, I have used something called fonts. This has been derived from the font.js file. And within the font.js file, you can see I have called the font family. We have different font families, and the reason why we have created created this file is because with different font families, we have different font weights. We need to use font types, font sizes. So instead of having to repetitively keep typing font family, font weight, font size, we can simply create an object that with the font family and also the font weight. This font weight is once again weight 500, which means font weight 500. It's easy for us to read it this way than saying font weight 500, font size 10, and so on. And this is being derived, and as you can see, it's the way we are calling it is also quite different. We have imported the common styles file, and from there we are calling the font weight. So this makes it easier for us to understand and for us to read. This is why, as the benefit I had mentioned before, where the code is more expressive and easy to read. For example, I have created a font weight over here. We have different weights. So each weight has been created as an object, and we can simply call it in here and create another object. So if we want to change it uniformly, we can just change it from font weight 500, font weight 600, and so on. Instead of having to go through different classes, I can just change it in one place. And the colors, once again, is we have different colors that we use throughout our application. And in keeping in mind the hex code and always going to find the hex code is quite difficult and takes time. Instead, we can create variables and assign the hex code values. And these variables can be called in multiple places, which makes it easier for us to understand what color we are using. And also, we don't have to keep in mind the hex code. And if you want to change color, for example, if dark blue is the primary color we are using, and we want to change the theme, we can simply change the color hex code, and that would render it throughout the application, which is another benefit. It makes it easier to modify. And font size is we can create different font sizes as well, similar to how we create different font weights. So these are all part of our common styles. So this is how we create a common React Native style sheet. And also we can create different buttons, and instead of always saying font size is 12, margin is margin bottom 35, and so on, we can make it more easy to read, because as a creator we can see the font size is 12, the margin is margin bottom 35, and the font we are using is Red Hat, and so on. It's easy for us to read, and it's easier to modify. And this is where we are bundling all these common style sheets by exporting all the common styles with an alias. And when we come to the CSS, the style sheets that we're going to use to call all the common styles, we can create another index.style.js file. And within that, we can create a unique styles, unique classes that has different styles, but we can call the common variable that we had previously created. So once again, it makes the code more concise, expressive, and easy to modify, and we have a clean code. We are removing all the redundant data as well. So we do not have any redundant or duplicate styles. And I also may be sure about how we are importing image.js files. So how do we call these image.js files in our JavaScript would be something like this. Instead of giving the file path, we import the image folder, and we simply call the image variable that we had created, images.landingpage.background. And instead of using inline styles, we import the style sheet that we had created previously, and we can call them all together in one place. So this makes our JavaScript code as even more easier to read and more clean. And that's the main purpose of having all the best practices, because it allows us room to modify the project or to make the code more expressive. And that would be the end of my talk. Thank you.